Hello, listeners. It's Gunter here with some exciting news. We're on the lookout for sponsors to join us on our incredible journey with Inspired Change with Gunter. If your organisation cares deeply about meaningful conversations around masculinity, self development, and mental health, we'd love to partner with you. Our podcast has a wonderful, dedicated audience committed to personal growth and positive social change. By sponsoring Inspired Change with Gunter, your brand will connect with listeners who truly value thoughtful discussion and support initiatives that promote real transformation. We're incredibly proud to be ranked number one in Australia and number 5 in the USA on FeedSpot's top men's mental health podcasts. For more information on how to become a sponsor, please reach out to Miranda Spigener-Sapon, our showrunner and executive producer. We'd love to explore how we can work together to inspire change. Now, thank you for your continued support, and let's keep inspiring change together.
You're listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. To guide us through the intricacies and intersections of emotions, relationships, and male identity is renowned psychologist, author, and speaker Gunter Swoboda. This is Inspire Change.
Before I begin the actual podcast, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I work. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspired Change with Gunter. I'm your host. Happy New Year, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Season 7 of Inspired Change with Gunter. I'm your host, and as we step into 2025, I want to take a moment to reflect on the start of this new chapter. A new year is often a time for resolutions, personal goals, and picturing the future. It's also a time to consider how our individual actions can contribute to the collective good. But as we celebrate new beginnings, I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the devastating wildfires currently ravaging Los Angeles. These fires highlight not just the urgency of environmental challenges, but also the absurdity of services, states, and organisations competing with each other or politicising natural disasters and tragedies. Instead of division, such moments call for unity, resilience, and collaborative action, reminding us of the power of collective healing. That's exactly what this season of Inspired Change is about. Transformation from the deeply personal to the profoundly social. So today I'm starting with an important concept, and that is why the personal is political. I want to explore how the choices you make in your life, how you love, lead, and learn contribute to dismantling entrenched systems like patriarchy. Remember, we don't live in a bubble. Every action and every thought has a ripple effect in the larger social and political environment. Similarly, the emotions that you project outward have a contagious effect. So, let's dive in. What does it mean to say the personal is political? You've likely heard the phrase, the personal is political. It actually originated from the feminist movement, which was about a call to recognize that our individual experiences are connected to the larger social fabric. Patriarchy, capitalism, racism, these aren't abstract concepts. They're built into our lives, shaping how we relate to ourselves, others, and the world as a whole. So let me make this concrete. Debates around paid parental leave in the United States illustrate how personal and political issues intertwine. When a father advocates for and takes parental leave, he's not only prioritising family, he's challenging workplace norms and influencing broader social attitudes towards caregiving. In the UK, for instance, the rise of shared parental leave policies reflects a shift in social values. Each family that adopts this practice contributes to normalising equality in parenting roles. Similarly, in Australia, campaigns for workplace flexibility championed by fathers show how individual decisions can spark cultural shifts. Now, if you go to the social media sphere, whether that be YouTube, Facebook, or whatever, it won't take you long to see that there's a monumental pushback against these changes. That pushback comes from conservative politics. In fact, they're probably not really conservative. They're more like right wing. And in that space, we're seeing a need for deeper challenge. Remember Rosa Parks? She was a high school student or a student in the United States, and her refusal to give up her bus seat wasn't just about her dignity. She was an African American in a segregated society. Now, it sparked a movement showing how one person's choice can reverberate throughout our society and culture. Now, similarly, in our own lives, we challenge oppressive systems not by living in isolation, but by consciously engaging with the world around us. So it is important to recognize, whether we want to ideologically accept it or not, is that we are all part of an interconnected web. Now, the area that I work in fundamentally, both as a therapist, as a counselor, as a mentor, as a coach, as, you know, in many respects, as an academic philosopher, I'm all about taking a closer look at how patriarchy operates in order to dismantle it. Now, patriarchy thrives, as I've said before in other seasons, on 5 core pillars. It's about territory, it's about hierarchy, it's about acquisition, it's about competition, and it's about combativeness. Now, those of you who've been paying attention to the President-elect Donald Trump can see all of this embedded in his attitude towards Canada, Mexico, the Panama Canal, and Greenland. Now, he comes with an attitude that makes this seriously toxic. So let's break it down. Let's look at hierarchy, for example. In many families, and this is where it comes down to the local level, it's assumed that the father is the ultimate authority. In Australia, some families are now adopting shared decision-making models where everyone's voice counts. Now, I'd like to say equally, but when you're 5 years old, I think we need to take that into context. Ultimately, my view is that the adults, mum and dad, wife and wife, need to work together to show the children in the family how this process works. Now, I've seen, because I've worked with lots of families, where we went from a hierarchical approach in the family to a collaborative one. What was the impact, you might ask? Well, interestingly enough, there was healthier communication and a stronger family bond. And those values the children carried into their own adult lives. In the US, the corporate world often prioritizes competition, leading to cutthroat environments. However, really progressive workplaces are showing that collaboration, cooperation, a traditionally undervalued approach in capitalism and in patriarchy, actually yields better results and improves employee well-being. How? Better job satisfaction, better morale, less sick leave, and less staff turnover. These are measurables, and we can translate all of those into dollars and cents. What about this thing about combativeness? Think about how boys in the UK are often encouraged to fight back or win at all costs. Now, having said UK, I've also got to say that this is very much a part of the US and Australian system as well. This mindset perpetuates aggression as a measure of success. Now, in a context like that, are we puzzled why some boys or some girls might rise to the level of being a bully? I don't think so. Now, if we look at figures like Nelson Mandela, who showed us a completely different path, Mandela's focus on reconciliation over retribution was a deeply personal held value. It was a choice with profound political consequences. He reminded us that strength through empathy and understanding can reshape societies. Now, in this transition, as you might point out that, South Africa is not exactly a good example of a healthy society. Stuff takes time. Change towards the positive is a process. It's not simply a destination that comes from a single decision. The metaphor of not living in a bubble applies here as well. Every time we engage with others, we reinforce or challenge patriarchal values. The personal choices we make create ripples that touch every part of our social fabric. So, one of the things that I write about and talk about is that I don't think we can see constructive social change without each and every one of us changing personally, evolving, growing. So, the idea is that personal growth becomes a catalyst for social change. So, how does that work? How does personal growth drive systemic changes? Well, firstly, it starts with awareness. When you become conscious of how social norms shape your thoughts and actions, you gain the power to choose differently. It's empowering and it's powerful. In the United States, mental health awareness campaigns have encouraged men to seek therapy and challenge the stigma around vulnerability. Similarly, in Australia, we're doing the same. A client that I worked with here in Australia, let's call him Michael, believed he had to embody the strong, silent type to be respected. Now, admittedly, he worked in a very male dominated environment, which carried with it a great deal of exposure to traditional masculine values that are essentially patriarchal. Unfortunately, over time, that belief isolated him from his family and eroded his mental health. Why? Because you can't suck everything up and expect to stay sane. Now, through the framework of making good men great and the process that I put into place in a therapeutic engagement with Michael, he learned to value that vulnerability can be much, much more than what it appears, that it's in fact a strength. A lot of guys, when they hear about being vulnerable, their toes curl. But allow yourself to experience that. Allow yourself, when you're in crisis, to reach out to others to get emotional support. to allow yourself to put on the table that you are not perfect, bulletproof, or invulnerable. So he began to opening up to his wife and kids and therefore created deeper connections. They just didn't see him as this cut-out father figure or husband figure. They began to experience him as a human being. Now, some of that transformation also inspired some of his colleagues who became also more emotionally open. And in part, their culture in the workplace shifted. It changed to a much warmer, supportive environment rather than a cold, competitive one. So in the UK, local community groups have been at the forefront of tackling patriarchy as well. I'm reading lots about men's groups that have started by exploring their own internalized beliefs about masculinity. Unfortunately, there are also, people in the manosphere who aren't necessarily about personal growth, but are about masculine dominance, coercive control. And it's going to take some chutzpah to actually hold up our ground in that context. Now, those groups that are challenging patriarchy and are beginning to advocate for things that are equitable in society, equitable policies at their workplaces, such as parental leave, equal recognition. This growth from one individual to the next is fueling systemic advocacy, showing that there is a ripple effect in individual transformation. Again, let me come back to the metaphor. You drop a pebble into a pond. The ripples expand outward, touching everything in their path. Our personal growth is like that pebble. It may start small, but its impact can reach far beyond what we imagine. When I was working in drug and alcohol and I was doing community education in that environment, one of the things I talked about was that one person who has an alcohol, drug, or gambling problem or severe addiction to something else immediately affects 4 other people. Okay? Now, each one of those other 4s will have an impact of another 4. So what we're seeing is that in the right way, in the right context, this is exponential. A lot can happen from that. Now, unfortunately, we're battling fertile ground for misinformation in social media, the dark web, all sorts of places. And unfortunately, it's coming from politicians who are both fueling but also thinking that they're deriving benefit from engaging with misinformation. With a lot of politicians, all we need to say is that they lie. It's as simple as that. Let's not give them more than that. They are liars in that context. Many politicians, however, are not. And they are sincerely trying to change the attitude and beliefs and positions that are held in the community as a whole. So you might go, okay, well, that's all very well and good, but are there practical steps wherein we can align the personal and the political? The really simple answer to that is yes. If the personal is political, then every choice you make matters. And so I'm going to give you 3 steps, but before I go into that, I'm going to give you a little example. And it's a sort of an interesting situation. One of my pet peeves are leaf blowers. And you might go, oh, maybe he needs to get a life. No, I don't need to get a life. I need to understand what a thing like that conveys. Now, when you watch someone using a leaf blower, all it does is it shifts the leaf from one place to another, usually your neighbours, right? So what's the message that you are giving your neighbour when you're doing that? Well, fundamentally, that I don't give a shit about your lawn or your yard or your aesthetics. That as long as my yard is leaf free, I'm content. Now, I won't go into the acoustic pollution that happens with those things. That might be for another time. So that example highlights that single-minded individualism that's rampant in our current society that actually makes a lot of this, firstly, fundamentally important, but secondly, a really, really difficult shift. So, what are the 3 steps that you can take today to align your personal growth with social change? Well, the first one is self reflection. Let me come back to the leaf blower. What am I doing? Once upon a time, we used a rake and a bucket. We'd rake up the leaves, put it in the bucket, and then we'd either compost it or throw it out. It would not encroach on my neighbours. In fact, if I dumped when I was a kid my leaves, under the neighbours' bushes, I would have some very angry parents on my hand from both sides. So I didn't do it because I didn't want to piss them off. So, we need to take it up a bit because now I'm an adult. So we need to identify the social norms that I've internalized and challenge them. So, for instance, as a male, do I avoid expressing emotions because I've been taught that it's a sign of weakness? So then reflect on how this belief impacts your life and relationships, my life and my relationships. I think it's really fundamentally important to challenge norms. Question the status quo. If you've always seen leadership as an act of dominance, of coercive control, ask yourself, well, what does leadership through empathy look like? And at that point, experiment with it. We also need to shift models. Remember, your actions speak louder than words. Whether it's in your family, workplace, or community, embody the values you want to see in the world. By doing so, you inspire others to do the same. Now, when you identify what your values are, go back to self-reflection and ask yourself, what are the consequences of my values? Now, one of the trick questions that I've often used is, let me ask you about loyalty. Do you think loyalty is a really important value? And a lot of people will immediately go, yes, absolutely. Okay. So tell me an organisation where loyalty is absolutely embedded as the highest priority, as the cornerstone. People will come up with all sorts of things, and I go, yeah, okay, that's all very well. But the one area where it stands out like dog's balls is in organised crime. You break the oath of loyalty, you are a dead duck. Now, you then got to ask yourself the question, right, am I going to be loyal to things that are intolerable, unacceptable, destructive, toxic? Well, most of us probably would go, no, I don't really want to do that. So when you come down, test your values. See how they fit in different contexts with different people. Do they hold up to scrutiny? Right? So in couples, when I worked with couples, there were 3 values: love, respect, and cooperation. Now you can put this to a test, and I challenge you to do that. Transfer your relationships to come from a basis of loving, being respectful, and being cooperative, and see what it does. Test it out for a month. Now, think about this too. By modeling open communication in your family, in your workplace, you're going to inspire other people in the family. You just might inspire your kids to carry those values into their schools and future workplaces. Think of yourself as a part of a larger ecosystem. Every action you take affects the whole. And these days we need to do that because we've got a shift, a geopolitical economic shift that is driving us towards autocracy, is driving us away from democracy, away from humanistic principles. We are seriously looking at a dystopian future if we continue on this road. And I'm not just talking about, the United States. This is happening globally. There's movements right throughout. And I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but somehow, to me, what stands out is that this could actually be a coordinated effort. I'm sort of thinking Davos. I'm thinking about, the meetings of billionaires who then buy politicians. I don't think they're operating necessarily in isolation. We've had an ex-Prime Minister in Australia spending New Year's at Mar-a-Lago. I find that personally deeply disturbing, as well as having a billionaire sitting at the table from Australia who's essentially operating, in the mining industry. And, at a time when we're trying to get a good balance between mining, between the ecosystem and so on, going that right wing is a concern. Now, one of the things that I want to leave you with is that this season is not going to, from my point, be political. In fact, in many respects, from here on in, I'm going to be relatively apolitical, but I'm going to challenge you on your ethics and morality. So as we wrap up today's episode, I want you to remind yourself that the personal is political, whether we like it or not, because we live in an interconnected world. Your growth, your choices, your voice, these are the seeds of change. Now, which way that change is going to go is up to us. So, after the first episode for season 7, let me thank you for joining me, and hopefully you'll join me for this journey. Next week, I want to dive into the historical roots a little bit, and I want to explore how we continue to influence modern masculinity. But until then, stay curious, stay compassionate, and remember that transformation starts with you. So this is me, Gunter, signing off. Stay inspired, and I'll see you next time. Until then, this is me signing off. Love to hear from you. And if you're interested, please check out my work on www.guntersvoboda.com or www.goodmengreat.com.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. For more information on the Making Good Men Great movement, or for individual or group coaching sessions with Gunter, visit goodmengreat.com.